At Orthodoxy. It is great to be with you today, even though Blake is not here with us. That's why you're hearing my voice at the beginning. I'm Doug, joined by Kyle, just two of us.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably run through like 30, 40 questions this session because Blake's not going to be here with his long-windedness.
Yeah, all his opinions and firm stances. And
we'll probably be like out of questions by the end of the next hour.
Yep.
But it is great to be with you. And Blake, we're with you in spirit, as I know you're with us. Let's jump in. We got some AER.
time for accusations, explanations, and recantations.
Kyle, in relation to the purity topic / the way people dress, what steps can we take to teach teens how to live with wisdom and self-control without instilling the negative that purity culture has brought about?
Jesus. Jesus is the answer. Again, I will. I'm sure I got it. I can't recommend this book enough because they talk about this in far better depth, with far more research, with far more thought than I can in the spur of the moment, and far more perspective of being a woman than I can ever offer.
What?
She Deserves Better by Sheila Ray Gregory. Again, fantastic book. This is on how to raise girls without having to undo a lot of the things we've done with the purity culture movement. So again, take the time, check their work out. Not only do they have that book, but they've got a podcast, a website, resources as well, if that's more palatable for you. One of the major things that I try to think of is, one, as a parent, not getting so scared of trends is one of the things I'm trying to keep in my mind, is a big one. Two, none of my motivations am I trying to have, or the decisions I'm making are to keep my daughters from owning another person's responsibilities or actions or behaviors like that. And I think the weight that comes with even just that alone is a lot of kind of the pressure. You can still come to, I think, some of the same conclusions without having to put the pressure on for somebody else's sake. And so when it comes to those conversations, then it often is a pivot to looking at elevating your daughter versus what she may then end up doing to another man who may then lust after her, or whatever the motivation would have been in the purity culture. And so every opportunity to encourage them and build them up is incredibly important. I heard years ago, and this stuck with me, this was when my oldest daughter was maybe 2 or 3. I heard a stat that girls' self-esteem peaks at 7 years old. And that blew my mind. That from then on, girls just becoming more and more self-defeating, and peer pressure mounts on. And so I since then have had a lot of mentality to be encouraging my girls in every way possible. And so what to dress, a lot of it with the conversation for me has rounded up about putting the most value in herself and seeing herself how she wants to see our 4-year-old. I'm not thinking of the conversation with her just yet, more than the pressure of what other people are going to get out of your clothing. I'm rambling. I'll stop.
I think that for your younger daughter, that conversation will be happening before you know it.
Yes.
Like, it's just startling how quick these things happen. A couple of things that I would say. First, I want to just echo what you said. I think the number one thing you can do as a parent is love your kids.
Yep.
They're going to make mistakes and they're going to mess up. I was talking to somebody recently, and we were talking about teenagers and kids, and we were talking about how I think one of the struggles that every parent has is by the time your kids are a teenager, you've forgotten how dumb you were.
Yep.
And that you did a different version of all the same things that your kids are doing.
Yep.
And you don't want to tell your kids that because you don't want them to make the mistakes that you now realize they were.
Yeah.
But you survived.
Yep.
And hopefully you had parents who loved you and helped you walk through them. And I was having lunch with somebody yesterday, a friend of mine, we just started talking about that age. And he started sharing some of the things that he's a pastor.
Yeah.
And he started sharing some of his stories from his teenage years. And I was like, because you would never, ever think this person would have done any of these things.
Yeah.
But so I think the number one thing we can do is remember that we were teenagers once.
Yes.
And I think that because the surface things that teenagers do change. We see them as a new thing versus realizing it's a new expression of the same thing.
Totally.
In the 50s, it was, early rock and roll, which was scandalous.
Right.
And then it was Elvis. And then it was the Beatles. And then, and it's funny because in the 80s, you kind of reached like as dark and as heavy as you could go just about with like the thrash metal and some of that stuff. That was really, and that was my generation. I know you weren't even like, nobody even thought someday you might exist at that point.
Little niches thought they would take it farther than that, but you're right. Culturally and width-wise, it's probably as dark as it got. Yeah.
But I don't know, like, I don't know that you could take it much farther.
Fair.
So, like, I'm 54.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see, like a teenager with the new. That was me 30 years ago, right? Like, it's funny, but we forget that.
Yep.
And I don't say that to put teens down. I'm not doing that at all.
Yep.
But that struggle that they're going through.
Yep.
And I think what we need to understand is it's a weird thing, but a teen's trying to express their individuality is their way of trying to fit in.
Yep.
They're trying to find out who they are and where they belong.
Yep.
And part of what they have to do is differentiate themselves from their parents.
Yep.
When your kids are little, they all just like what you like.
Yep.
And especially with Leah more than the others, but I've been very intentional about Leah because Leah more than any of my other kids has been like, is that what you like? Then that's what I like.
Yeah.
So even like Leah loves to watch sports. What team are you cheering for? And whatever team I say, she'll go, I'm going to cheer for them too.
Yeah.
And I always say, you don't have to cheer for the same team as me. It's okay.
Yeah.
But that's part of being a little kid.
Yep.
You are in that place where what your parents like is by definition what you like. And then as you become a teenager, part of what you're doing, which is totally natural, is figuring out who you are.
And necessary for you to become an independent
absolutely.
person. Yeah.
And so it takes a lot of different shapes.
Yep.
Part of it is how you dress. Part of it is how you act. It's the music you listen to. My daughter, in the last number of months, has all of a sudden, like, she always just loved whatever I loved, and now it's constantly wanting to listen to Taylor Swift.
You and me both, Doug. You and me both.
And so here's the thing. You know how at the end of the year, you get your Spotify Wrapped?
Yeah.
I don't let her ever use my Spotify account.
It'll ruin my stats.
I always let her listen to Laura Lee's, and Laura Lee's every year gets destroyed. But mine is like, no, mine is what I like.
Yeah.
And she's like, can we listen to music on your? No, we can't. No, I don't like. My phone won't play Taylor Swift, and I'm not anti Taylor Swift. Just not my style of music. That's all I'm saying. But this is another way of her differentiating, which is, like you say, healthy and natural and necessary. If we want them to become adults who are full functioning, healthy people, they have to do this. It's painful. It's painful as a parent because sometimes they do choose things that are the opposite of what you want. Absolutely. I think through that is continuing to love them. And the other thing, and we got this advice with our older kids, and it's proven to be true, is you just keep talking to them about the things that matter. Keep giving them the things that are the priorities in your life. Don't make everything a priority. When everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. But the things that matter, just keep saying that. We had somebody say to us once, like, just keep saying that. Because they are hearing it. It's just not getting through yet. And my oldest daughter, like, I can remember when she was like 19, her talking to me one day, she's like, Dad, I'm just so annoyed because all the things that you've always said to me that I always hated, now I find myself saying to my friends.
Right.
And I was like, ha, in your face. Okay, maybe that was what the inside was saying. But it was a cool moment. That didn't seem like there was any listening. So figure out what are the things that you want to encourage, but also give them as much room as possible to differentiate, understanding that human nature is, if I'm way over on the right, when I realize I'm too far right, I go too far left. I don't fall into the middle ground. That's just, we are all pendulums. And so there's a good chance that your kid might swing far to the other side at some point. they're wrestling through things, and they will say things. They'll say things like, "This is it, and this is now what I believe for the rest of my life."
Yep.
And they mean it in that moment.
Totally.
Because they're wrestling through. So walk with them and be gracious to them.
I think that's wise. I was chatting with my barber yesterday. I was getting my haircut. Somebody's got to support the local barbers here in Airdrie.
I can tell you got your haircut again.
And so chat with him about it, and we were just chit-chatting about things that we've learned as we grow up, and teenagers, actually, funny enough. And he's like, but I ended up making a point of we wouldn't have been able to hear it in those days, even if we were told it directly. There's some things that we had to learn the hard way, and there's going to be levels of that with your teens. The one thing I would say is in that conversation, which Doug, you're already alluding to and saying, like, they're going to make mistakes. I think one of the things that pushes them farther and farther out to those opposites is how we talk about things. And especially when it comes to dress, I saw in the purity culture movement, it was moralizing this, like wearing yoga pants or spaghetti straps or bikinis is a sin.
Yes.
And we're going like, that is not going to help, because that kid's going to see right through that argument and go, well, I don't think that was a sin. First of all, a bunch of people in Jesus' day were probably walking around naked. So that was, and so they can see through the false and lazy arguments. I think when it comes again back around to talking about how there's value in the way we dress for this, that, and the other purpose, and this is how it can build you up. Even if they don't hear it and they choose to go the other way, it's a different pushback than when we try to moralize the clothing versus talk about a value of it. And I think that'll help how far they push back.
I think that we have to realize our kids reach an age, and it's earlier than we'd like it to be, where our job shifts from telling them what to think to teaching them how to think.
Yes.
And I remember hearing somebody once say, "You're not raising kids." And I remember reading an article about steroid use, that if you go into a high school, because they did a study on this, don't use steroids, it's less effective than if you say, here are the benefits of steroids, but here are also the dangers. If you present a balanced argument, people are more likely to hear you because they see that you're presenting a balanced argument. And I've always thought that and been like, yeah, okay, let's have a conversation. And what is the good that come out of it? But also, what is the bad that could come out of it? And how do you weigh that out yourself? So,
on a similar note, I heard a while ago that campaigns against smoking for a long time were really unsuccessful by showing health data and all that. The thing that finally convinced mass amounts of people to stop smoking was painting tobacco companies as like these bad guys out to get your money. And everybody had this mentality of rebellion of like, screw them, we're gonna keep our money. And that was one of the most successful campaigns.
Fighting against big tobacco.
Totally. So I think honestly, part of it is also learning the language of your kid. Right. And so I think there could be ways we play into what are they trying to rebel against and learning how to help them with that too.
I think just remember, this is going to be a long-term process. And they're probably going to end up at a different place than what you want. Because when they're teens, the goal is to help them figure out who they are and where they're going to be. And I think most teens don't end up exactly carbon copies of their parents.
No.
So.
No.
He gets us, in air quotes,
for the audio
that
listeners.
Ad that ran on the Super Bowl, advertising Jesus' approach. Apparently, it shows several controversial groups, i.e., a priest washing an LGBTQ member's feet, police officer washing a criminal's feet, etc. Millions of dollars were spent on this ad. He gets us. Is it okay? It may be worth your looking at as a topic for your inverted theology questions, or is it too controversial to handle? You decide.
Well, we're reading it, so I think we've decided that we're going to go with it.
Either that or we didn't read it ahead of time and now we have to.
Just in case people are wondering, actually, I've had a couple people ask in the last while. We have only ever once not answered a question. Every question that's come in, except for that one, and that was like in the first couple months of us doing that.
And it was a question that was like
was trying to bait us into using inappropriate language that they hoped we would not know, kind of a slang term. Other than that, we've taken every question. So we have not found the limit yet.
So maybe as we've gotten older, we have been fooled into saying things we shouldn't have said.
Maybe. Totally. Once I got out of the youth pastor role and didn't know all the cool lingo, then we were hooped. I think there are There are a lot of perspectives on this, and I have a lot of mixed emotions on the He Gets Us campaign. To back it up, it's been going longer than even just this year's Super Bowl. It might have been, also in last year's Super Bowl, but they've been around a number of major events, and the campaign has been going for a few years in my awareness. Let's start with some of the...
You always get more publicity, though, when you advertise on the Super Bowl.
Totally. Let's start with some of the controversial groups here. So priest washing LGBTQ persons' feet. I just want to say to this one, the assumption that couldn't have been a Christian is a poor one. That I think is a default assumption for a lot of people within the evangelical American-ish idea, but I get what it was trying to do. Police officer washing a criminal's feet. The idea that I've heard a lot of pushback against these is it condoning the actions of these people? And so saying there can't be any room if we serve. And that is such a flawed idea, and you have to look no further than the pages of our Gospels to see who Jesus washed their feet, including the disciples, the one who was about to betray him. All the rest of them had sins out the wazoo, issues in their own lives. And so... like that old toss back phrase.
Sometimes I can't help but wonder. I hear something, I'm like, is that the first time in the history of the world those words have ever been spoken together? And they had sins out the wazoo. I think that it's quite possible. That's the first time in all the billions of people who've ever lived and all the trillions of conversations that have ever happened that collection of words has been said in that order.
Fair enough. Far more problems than we could ever depict in a 15-second commercial ad. And if Jesus was willing to stoop and wash feet, that is not a condone. It is a value of the person who is having their feet washed to be, regardless of what your take is on what they have done, what they will do. Jesus is showing in that moment a level of servanthood in his way of loving the world and a value in that person. And so every Christian, I think, should be compelled by the idea of washing somebody's feet. And so as a visual image, I think it's a really important one. I may take some different opinion on the using money to do that as a Super Bowl ad. I would question the efficacy of doing that. I think the idea of washing feet as a commercial is lost on everybody who's not an evangelical Christian. I don't think anybody who is not a believer in Jesus and has an idea and history of understanding of the washing of feet being this moment of servanthood is probably thrown off by what the heck's happening in this 15-second commercial and then moves off to the next thing. And so the millions upon millions of dollars that were spent there that could have been spent towards other endeavors, for the bang for your buck kind of question, I would just say I have very high doubts on it making much of a difference, especially for that high of a dollar value. I'm not saying I have anything issue with the images and the picture and what it was saying, but yeah, I've got questions about the efficacy and the money that was spent.
Yeah, I think there's people with lots of money who wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. I don't have a problem with it. I didn't think it was nearly as controversial. I agree with you. I think sometimes Christians don't understand or don't realize that we learn our own lingo and have our own insider language that the world doesn't get.
Yep.
So they would see a priest washing an LGBTQ person's feet, and they would...
They're affirming.
Well, no, but they wouldn't... No, I'm saying the person who has no church background wouldn't understand that's an image of Jesus. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it might have been something that got lost in translation.
Yeah.
Every group, no matter what group it is, this is not a Christian problem. Every group ends up with insider language.
Yep.
Whether that be people in certain professions, people in certain faith groups, people in certain sports. Like you all have insider language, and thinking outside of that box is something that is understandable, is certainly going to be always be a challenge. The thoughts on he gets us. I think of Hebrews chapter 4. Jesus was tempted in every way like we are, and so he's not unable to sympathize with us in our weaknesses. I go, how? I don't understand where all the controversy came from. I agree with you that I think that part of the problem in the church that this ad caused controversially is that it's human nature to make us versus them. And when you come into the church, you're still human. And so in the church, there are still a lot of people who struggle with us versus them. Instead of, I think that what we're called to have shaped in our life is the heart of Jesus, and that's a heart that realizes there are no thems. And it's a hard thing to get over, and it's easy to redefine who the them is. And think, therefore, you're making progress. We think that because oftentimes we no longer, in the wider North American culture, we're less likely to make overt judgments based on someone's skin color, that we have progressed. But we will make quiet judgments about someone based on their skin color. And we will also now make judgments based on somebody based on what we think their political ideology is. So all we've done is shifted or gotten more subtle about it, and we assume that's progress. Versus the message of that commercial was Jesus is for you. Whoever you are, Jesus is for you. And I think it's a tragedy that message was so controversial in the church. That's tragic. That in the church, people didn't just go, well, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Like we should all think that. It boggles my mind sometimes how we, instead of being transformed by the renewing of our mind, we just follow the same patterns of the world, but we just redraw the lines and think, therefore, we're different. And it makes me very sad.
Which, being charitable, I think the He Gets Us campaign is seeing that has been the last number of decades, I would say, the posture of many representing the evangelical church of us versus theming. And so they're trying to speak, I would assume, two groups that have typically felt like we are not welcome and they don't understand me and my lifestyle. And
I'm not finding fault with the He Gets Us people.
I'm just I'm trying to explain further of like, I see that's their heart of saying, we see the groups that the evangelical church typically hasn't been, and Jesus sees you too. Like if that's the heart of the message, I would have talk about, but I don't see controversy behind it on the theology, the depiction, all those pieces, as much as just efficacy and usefulness.
At its core, one of the biggest, I don't want to say struggles, one of the biggest stumbling blocks that people had with Jesus was, and he just freely invited people into the kingdom, almost
wazoo coming into the kingdom.
I'm not even going to respond to that. And now we're called to be the body of Christ. We're called to represent Jesus. The one who was controversial because everyone was invited in almost too easily to appease other people. But instead, we've now become the ones who don't want to let people in too easily.
You welcome me in, but not you.
Yes. Totally. So I watched the He Gets Us video just before the podcast started again, because I saw this question on there, and I was like, if the church would embrace that mentality, not to literally wash people's feet, because I don't know that people would understand that, but to serve those around us.
That has always
we would be exploding with the growth that we desperately want.
Totally.
So, and we're called to be priests. So,
Great.
All right.
All right, Doug.
Oh, are you asking me?
Oh, well, you've done the first two. I may as well flip it back
All right.
your way. Which translation of the Bible do you prefer? Recently, Doug, you read a verse and then gave the same verse in the ESV. Are some versions more accurate than others? Which version would you recommend to teens or new Christians? Are some easier to understand than others?
Absolutely, some are easier to understand than others. Some are more accessible and more readable. And so which would I recommend? Lately, I would recommend the New Living Translation. And I'll be honest, the only reason I would recommend that is because I've been really enjoying it in my personal reading again.
Yeah.
I think it is very accessible. I think that most people could understand what it's saying. They do a good job of taking some difficult things and expressing them in some really good ways. But I would say there's not I've kind of come to this weird place where there's not a translation I prefer.
Right.
More than ever before in my life, when I'm preparing a sermon, I will look at multiple versions.
Yep.
And when I'm preaching a sermon, I will use different versions.
Yep.
1984.
Hey, there you go.
The original and still the best. No, that was the only.
Yeah.
It was
the only one
before
available.
any of the other ones came out. It only became.
It was just the NIV.
Yeah, it only became NIV 1984 after the new NIV.
Yeah.
Which that's the new international version, which is weird. But. And then for a while I switched and I was pretty much just the ESV.
Yep.
But now I would just use, I will use in a sermon sometimes the ESV, sometimes the NIV, sometimes the LEB, sometimes the Message, sometimes the New Living Translation. Those would be the 5 that I most frequently use. But I would say, and Kyle said this a million times, the best version is the one you're going to read.
Yep. Yeah.
And so for me, make it accessible, especially if it's a teen or a new Christian.
Yeah.
I like the Message version a lot.
Yeah.
So I recommend that one as well.
Cool. I'll kick off with which translation, because you gave your kind of top 5 translations of the Bible do you prefer. I have been using most predominantly the LEB, Lexham English Bible, for years. It's only available digitally, so that their scholars can continue to work on it, and then you don't have an out-of-date version, which some people get up in arms about, that they're constantly editing the Bible, but that's a whole nother conversation. Next to that, I use the NASB a lot.
I went through a phase a long time ago where I was like total NASB guy.
And then I have a lot of friends, and so it's kind of influenced me to also use the NRSV, which I really enjoy too.
I was an RSV.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Before there was an NRSV.
I think there's probably an NRSV now too. New Revised Standard Version.
In all of these translations, almost always is N new.
Yes.
Just so everybody knows, because we're using a lot of insider language right now.
Yes. And then for more accessible ones, I really like the CEB. Have you checked that one out much?
No.
I think they're on the 2nd edition, maybe 3rd. But the scholar list on it can't be beat. Like, fantastic work on that. And then last, certainly not least, I'd definitely toss the Message in there because it's got to make the top 5. And so those are kind of my preferred ones, but again, I'll echo Doug in I try not to stay just in one. Especially when sermon prepping, but even just in personal reading and devotion. My Logos, it opens up in this window, and it has all my library of translations available at the top on one window, and then all my commentaries down below. And so I type in my verse, and it pops up in all the translations that I have available on my software, and I will then read through them all. Moving on in through the question.
Maybe this is a generation gap, but what I've actually been doing is I open a Word document and then I copy them all in. So a similar idea, but then print off a piece of paper.
Oh, yeah.
Because I sit and read all the different versions on a piece of paper and mark things up and look actually with a pen and paper.
See, now seeing behind the curtain a little bit. When I do all my sermons, I have 2 documents that I have every time. Sermon title, rough sheet, and sermon title. And then I just grab everything, including translations, and then anything from commentaries I like, and copy and paste it and dump everything and my own thoughts onto one document, and I browse through it there. And then that's my process.
I actually use paper.
Wow. Just environment killer.
I know. Sorry, I shouldn't have confessed that.
Are some versions more accurate than others?
Yes.
I will say yes and no. In the sense, I know that's a confusing answer, and I kind of meant it to be just for fun. That is the heart of translation, is trying to be more literal or bring out the heart of a intention and meaning of a passage. And those are the kind of two extremes. And so you get into some translations that are difficult and clunky to read because they're trying so hard to be as literal as possible. But literal is not always the win, as much as bringing things alive. And so again, trying to read in a variety of them is helpful. And then kind of seeing where some of these translations are on those spectrums is really helpful to see what they're trying to do. And then like all things, we as humans go too far on both extremes. So people are arguing for the really importance of the King James Bible. I saw a clip, I don't know if you've come across it. It was a pretty recent one. The King James Bible is so good I can correct the Greek with this.
Yes, I saw that.
Oh my goodness. I'm not going to necessarily fault the King James Bible, but it is so hard to access for many people because of the barrier of entry, that it is, and people saying that it's the one you must read in that kind of argument makes it so that you're just not going to get anything out of Scripture because one, you're going to not be able to understand it, or two, you're just not going to bother to read it. On the other end, I've long knocked and mocked the Passion Translation. And so or the Amplified is another one that I would have concern, but not to the degree of the Passion Translation, about going too far to just bring out meaning from the one person's view and perspective. And so then everything else falls well within those two extreme boundaries in my mind. And so every one of them is trying to be more accurate in the heart and the philosophy behind that translation. And most translations will have kind of an introductory couple pages at the beginning of them to explain their philosophy behind the translation process. So yes and no to that part.
See, get off the fence, man. No, yes, some are more accurate than others. Absolutely, some are more accurate than others.
They are, but in a different sense.
No, but some are better than others.
Yes, totally.
So the answer to that is yes.
But like,
it is a clear yes.
I love the message because how it brings out the heart of things and the familiarity that many of us who've been followers.
Even beyond the different strategies and methods used in translation / transliteration and where on the spectrum they land.
Yeah.
Some translations are better than others.
Yes, but so I'll pull like.
I'm just trying to force you because that some translations are better than others.
I just knocked 3 on the extreme ends for being less accurate.
The answer is yes.
But then when I look at other things, like somebody's picking up their NIV, jumps on and tries the LEB, but also then tries the Message, the Bible for Everyone, which I also really like from N.T. Wright.
I'm not specifically saying which ones are better than others, but some translations are better than others.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
But the majority of them are all good. Yes. And everyone would have some, I don't want to say failures, limitations based on the way that they translate. Yep. I have fewer issues with the Amplified Bible than you do.
Yep.
Although I'm not a huge fan of it myself, just because I find it very clunky and very, like, they spend so much time trying to express what this Greek word is or this Greek phrase is that it just gets lost. Yes. Like, I'm like, okay.
What were we talking about again?
Yeah. And so, but I know other people who love it. They love the way that it just kind of repeats things and kind of comes back around, uses multiple words just in a repeated way at different times. So, yes, I get it. But we should... NLT, New Living Translation. NIV, New International Version. NASB, New American Standard Bible. NRSV, New Revised Standard Version. KJV, King James Version. NKJV, New King James Version. Are those all of the alliterations we use?
CEB, the Common English Bible.
Common English.
I said the Bible for Everyone, so that one's out there.
I think that might be all the acronyms we use.
I think so.
The majority of them, none of them is perfect.
Yep.
And I think that's an important thing for us to say. Yep. They're all translations. When we talk about the inerrant, some people argue that word, infallible, inspired word of God, is important to understand. Anyone theologically speaking is talking about the original language.
Even the statement, the Chicago statement, where that was all founded, even make sure to make that distinction.
Yes.
Yes.
That no translation doesn't have problems. And I think that's part of the problem is the guy with the King James, who I can use this to correct the Greek. It's like, okay, so then everyone who doesn't speak English in the world is in trouble?
Correct.
Like, it's just weird. We are so ethnocentric, especially when it comes to things like this, that we don't even realize the problem inherent in it. What we want is a heart open to allow God to speak through Scripture. And God can do that through all of the limitations of any reasonable translation.
For ones I would recommend to teens or new Christians, I would almost take those as two separate questions, because I think new Christians, again, that would be personally dependent. Like, I'm going to meet people that want and are willing to do the challenge to take a little bit more of a more literal translation and go through that, or maybe just their level of academics or whatever education would help them lean towards one of those. But if it's going to be most accessible and enjoyable, or maybe they're a really poetic type person, whatever it may be, that might be a different one. So that one would range across all the ones that we've mentioned. For a teen, personally, my number one would be the CEB. The scholarship behind it, the accuracy for it is great. The team behind it, and then next to that, for me, would be the Bible for Everyone with N.T. Wright and John Goldingay. Really excellent translation as well.
I was actually watching a theologian on YouTube recently who talked about the King James Version.
Okay.
Who talked about for the first 200 or 300 years of the King James Version, it was not popular or well received.
Oh, really?
Or liked scholarly.
Right.
But like Tyndale and Wycliffe had already translated the Bible. They ended up getting outlawed. And that's why it's called the authorized version, because it became the authorized version. And it wasn't until language changed 300 years later that it became this beloved thing. So interesting history of the King James Version of the Bible. But the main thing is the translation that you will read.
Cool.
So, all right. Kyle. This question came in on April 8th, which was right after a Sunday where we practiced stillness at the end of a sermon. And as part of that, Doug said a few times that it is easy to get distracted, and it's a good practice to bring yourself back to stillness. I've also heard people say that sometimes in the stillness, something can pop into your mind because God wants to highlight or point something out. So in the stillness, can something come to mind, and instead of brushing it aside, you pray and discuss that with God, asking him why it has come to mind and what he wants to show you about it. What are your thoughts on this?
Great question. I love that. Yes, I think something can come to your mind, and instead of brushing it aside, I'll jump quickly to Samuel when he hears God's voice and brushes aside, and kind of not brushes it aside. He was confused by it, but I think it's a comparative enough example where if God wants to speak to you, he will bring it back. And so, me to my default. Or again, one more biblical analogy where Peter has the vision of dropping all the unclean food before him. He refuses. No. I can see in my rules type way of living that if I'm like trying to practice stillness and God tries to speak to me, I brush it aside. No, I'm practicing stillness, God. Stop interrupting me. He will be persistent enough to bring that back. And so then if that continues to happen, that is when me, through my thick skull, will likely go, okay, maybe there's something here, and begin to speak and engage in that. I think the practice of stillness many times can be something to, yes, just be still and be aware of the presence of God. But I think also in the busy and hurried lives we live, stillness may be the first time in a week that some of us are sitting still enough to hear what God has been trying to say for the whole time. And so, yes, maybe you're intending to go to that moment of stillness just for stillness itself, and God goes, I've got my moment, and I'm speaking that out of experience. So I think that would be a very normal and welcome experience.
So maybe I didn't, on this day, relay as clearly as I wanted to what the practice and my hope in practicing stillness is. And that's certainly quite possible. It's not that we're trying to empty our mind of anything and become still and find nirvana.
No.
That's not the Christian way.
No.
The point is to make space to allow God to speak.
Yep.
So when I say the distractions, for me, those distractions are always the things that are already on my mind. So I wake up in the morning, as I'm sitting there, as soon as you wake up, you got all these thoughts.
Yep.
But what do I need to do today about, if you hear a noise in the other room, I'm like, oh no, what is Leah doing now?
Yeah.
To whatever. Like your mind goes to 100 different places that are your mind places.
Yep.
And it's only, I think, through the practice of engaging in stillness that we're able to start to differentiate the difference between, oh, this is just a distraction versus this is a God thing.
Yep.
Because the point is to make space to allow God to speak.
Yep.
And so for me, when I talk about being distracted, running away, is those things that were on my mind before I started practicing stillness that just keep invading. Or when I just start thinking about, oh, I got to wash my car today. Oh, I need to get gas. Oh, whatever, right?
Yep.
So those are the things that you're trying to push away. But then there's other times when all of a sudden, as I'm sitting in stillness, like this thought will come in and I'm like, oh, this is a God thing.
Yeah.
This is what I need to pay attention to. This is this is what I've created space for.
Yep.
And I remember years ago hearing someone say, and I love the way they express this, the less likely something came from you, the less likely it came from you.
It's good.
And so that's how I approach my stillness time.
Yep.
If I'm sitting in stillness and all of a sudden I'm start thinking about what am I going to make for supper tonight?
Yep.
Or some random thought like that, that's probably a Doug thought because I'm hungry.
Yeah.
But if I'm sitting there in stillness and all of a sudden I'm impressed with, I need to pray for this person.
Yep.
Or, today I need to just check in on that person.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the thoughts that I typically give a little weight to and go, okay, this is a God thing.
Right.
So it's not just dismiss all of the thoughts so that you can be in a state of Zen.
No.
And please understand that. It is creating a space so that God can speak. And then as these thoughts come into your mind, looking at them and going, okay, do I think this is a God thought or do I think this is a me thought?
Yeah.
But there's also a difference between a thought coming into my mind and my mind running away to a different thing.
Yes.
Right? Like I can be sitting in my office and trying to be still. And then I hear the garbage truck coming up the alley and I'm like, oh, did Nick take out the garbage? Oh, did he take out the compost? Oh, you know what I mean? Like that's a distraction. Yeah. That's not a thought coming into my mind.
Yeah.
And so I try to differentiate between those two. So maybe I didn't explain that as well as I wanted to that Sunday, but that is the point, is to create space for those thoughts, because the voice of God for me is often just thoughts that come into my mind. And I've learned to recognize that some of these thoughts that come into my mind are prompted by the Spirit of God.
Yeah. I will live AER. I said stillness for stillness' sake, and just you continuing to comment on that a couple times. Want to clarify as well. Was it Richard Foster or Dallas Willard who talked about the difference between Christian meditation and other meditation?
I think that's Foster in a celebrational discipline,
where it was talking about it's not just trying to empty your mind, but fill it with awareness of the presence of God. So when I practice stillness, especially in the mornings, my habit is to try to be most aware of the presence of God that I so often ignore, so that when I leave that moment of prayer, I am aware of God with me at all times. And so it's not often for me a time that I intend to start with listening as much as just recognizing the presence of Jesus with me at all times. And so I'm still to recognize that. And that's what I meant by stillness for stillness' sake.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to, how do I say this that doesn't sound weird? I'm not trying to listen.
No.
I'm trying to be available in case God wants to speak.
And then he happens to do it.
Right. Because oftentimes, if you try to listen to somebody, then somebody starts talking and then you're starting to think of what they're saying because you're trying so hard that you're not actually listening.
Yeah.
Like listening when we're doing it well requires the effort of attention.
Yep.
That's where the effort goes.
Yeah.
And so it's the effort of paying attention.
Yep. Totally.
So
Cool.
we are killing it.
We are. Blake
We're
and all his
crushing
opinions
it.
out of the way here.
Yeah.
All right, Doug. Well, I'm very new to Christian beliefs and started reading the Bible for the first time only a few weeks ago. I want to learn.
That's cool. way to go.
Yeah, really well done. But I'm not ready to attend in-person church until I know this is the right path for me. Totally get that. My question is, are there any specific previously recorded weekly teaching Q&As or any other online resources that you would recommend for a newcomer like myself? Are there daily practices other than Bible reading that I can start to help build my relationship with God?
Absolutely. So I'm not telling you have to come to church, but I would just encourage you with church is a place for all people who have decided this is the right path and people who are deciding whether or not this is the right path for them. You don't have to wait until you decide before you can come to church. If you want to come to this church, you are more than welcome wherever you are. But if you're not ready because you're just not feeling it, I get that as well. But this is a place for people at all stages of their faith journey. We have, because this came in through, we don't know if it came in through inverted orthodoxy. Living Springs, which is the church that we pastor at, also has a weekly teaching that you can make yourself available. There are other weekly teachings. There are a lot of online resources. I don't want to overwhelm you with a million of them. So I'm trying to think of the two. No, because I'd rather give a few that I'd really want to say, here's where to start. And so I would say before you get into online resources, I would say other than Bible reading, prayer, and some silence, and to start endeavoring to live the way Jesus calls us to live, and see if that changes your life. See if that is fruitful and brings about the life of abundance that Jesus taught. And the easiest way to do that would be to go to the Sermon on the Mount and read the Sermon on the Mount and go, okay, this is when Jesus had some new disciples and was like, let me teach you. This is where he began. And so start there and read that and go, okay, which of these do I need to start doing? And how do I start doing these and incorporating these in my life? Not in a, I'm going to follow all these rules way, but recently I heard I read a quote that I've been pondering for a while since I heard it. And it was like, we typically try to think our way into a new way of living, and that never works. We need to live our way into a new way of thinking.
Nice.
And I've been thinking about that in the context of the Sermon on the Mount and Jesus with his disciples, right? He takes these disciples in Matthew 4, and the beginning of Matthew 5, he's like, he walks up a mountain, they walk up with him, and he sits down, he starts teaching them. And he doesn't teach them a bunch of theology. He doesn't say, here's all of the things you need to get right.
Here are the practices to do.
Here's what Orthodox behavior looks like. He says, here's some things to do. Pray, give to the poor, fast, forgive your enemies, do more than is required of you, bless those who persecute you. Like,
pay attention to your heart and your emotions and your intentions.
Exactly. Right. And he's calling them into this understanding. I think Jesus understood this idea of what I mentioned in that quote. Start doing these things and live your way into a new way of thinking and see the fruit of it. I personally believe that you can't go wrong following the way of Jesus. And if you do commit to going the way of Jesus, and the way of Jesus is different than the way of the Bible, we need to understand that. There's a book, The Year of Living Biblically, where a guy decided he's going to follow all the Bible rules. And that's not the same thing. So we need to understand that. Say, okay, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna see whether or not the result of that is the fruit of that is a more abundant life. I believe that anyone who does endeavor to do those things will find that.
Agreed. I think Rachel Held Evans also wrote the Year of Living of Biblical Womanhood as well. I don't know if this questioner was male or female, so that one was also fun read. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you're saying, Doug, but I will throw a couple recommendations out that I think would be really helpful, that I love what I have been exposed to in tapping into these resources, and wish there had been something like that from the get-go. That for me, that has often been a deconstruction and reconstruction, or renovation, as Brian Zond, who we likes to say, that I think if these things were there from the beginning, I wouldn't have had to do so much renovation. So I would say with the prayer, because I think the idea of just starting to pray is a welcome one, but having some tools and some structure for me has been helpful in the way that I think. So I can't recommend enough Lectio 365, which is what I personally use for my...
Which is an app on your phone.
Yeah, an app on your phone. Goes through prayer and scripture every day. You can also just listen to it, which creates space for stillness built right into it. As well as they have a Lectio for families, which I do with my kids most mornings when I'm on the ball, going through that. And then for the Bible is an intimidating thing, and there is much to get to know about it. That there's absolutely a lot you can get from reading at the first glance and understanding it, and you'll benefit from it. But to have tools to help partner with that and depth of understanding, both from a intellect side as well as an experiential and heart side, I don't think you can beat the Bible Project, especially recommending the Sermon on the Mount to start. This year they're on a journey to go through the whole of the Sermon on the Mount. Bema is great, but I feel that's more like a person who's been into their faith for a long time.
I felt like I was thinking about Bema, and I was like, nah, I love Bema. I got nothing bad to say about Bema, but I don't know that it is.
I don't think it's
a
new
starting
Christian.
point.
No, and so that's where I go. Bible Project is, I think, one of my most trusted resources that you can start with them no matter where you're at on your faith journey.
So just endorsement for the Bible Project, which wholeheartedly. So as I do daily Bible discoveries, we walk through different books.
Yeah.
And every time, and they don't even know this on daily Bible discoveries,
Yeah.
but part of what I do,
Yeah.
so we're currently we just got done, we're working through the Minor Prophets.
Yeah.
The day that I finish a Minor Prophet,
Yeah.
unless we're going to do the book over again, because if I'm doing the book over again, then I do it again.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to go into a new book, I watch the Bible Project video on the next book of the Bible. Because if you go to YouTube and you just type in the Bible Project and any book of the Bible, you'll get an overview of it. And that's part of what I do just to refresh myself about what the big picture of this book is that helps as I read the parts of it.
Totally.
So that I don't think that's very accessible.
It depends on what you're looking for, to be honest, and I'd encourage the listener, if you're willing. I know this came in through an anonymous source. Feel free to reach out to our emails listed either at the Inverted Orthodoxy website, our general one, or to Living Springs page. You can reach out to either of us. What you're curious about often is a big part of it. I think there's a level of discipline that has to happen for any good thing, including the development of our faith. But I think there's also a level of interest that helps go a long way. We've talked lots about exercise in our own personal lives. And I've often said to people, do the thing that you're going to enjoy. And I ran for years and then got bored of it and shifted to weightlifting because I was all of a sudden enjoying that. And I've said to people, if pickleball is what's going to get you exercising, go play pickleball. Like, do what's going to interest you. And
Fastest growing sport in the world.
It is. I hear that every time I think pickleball comes up.
Pickles aren't at all a part of it.
I know. Surprising, right?
Yeah.
Other than after for rehydration and getting those salts, that salt back in.
Is that what it's about?
Yeah. But so whatever is interesting you, if you're a history buff, we've got some great resources I could point you towards the beautiful story of Christian history. If you're into cultural conversations, there's lots of resources we could point you towards there. If it's poetry and art, like lots of places depending on what you were looking for that can help in your journey. But again, I know church doesn't sound like it's the right space for you yet. I would love to see you get there. And again, reaffirm the welcome for all, but don't do the journey alone.
Yeah.
Find another believer or somebody, I've loved the term that I heard a long time ago, spiritual nomad, somebody else who's along for the journey. It doesn't have to be in a church building, but find somebody else or a few people at best to go along this with you in discovering this way of Jesus, because it's a heavy one to carry alone. And so go on this journey with friends and companions. That's the best way to journey anyways.
I would also just say when you get to the point that you're going to a church or you want to go to a church, one of the things that I would really encourage is if you attend a church that doesn't encourage you to ask questions and doesn't encourage you to wrestle and doesn't have people who will not just tell you what to think, but teach you how to think and teach you how to wrestle and invite you into the wrestling that is faith, because wrestling is a faith, find a different church.
Yeah.
Because we want to go to a church where we're allowed to allow the Spirit of God to work. And if you're very new to Christian belief, I believe that part of what's happening in your heart as you're wrestling with all of this stuff is a Spirit-led process of God leading you into understanding who He is and how He wants to help you live the fullest life that Jesus came to give. So if you end up in a church where they don't allow you to wrestle, but they just tell you what the answer is, find a different church.
Totally.
So that's it. We only got a few minutes left, so we're not going to endeavor to answer another
Even
question.
at the pace we're moving, we
Yeah.
shouldn't.
Next week, Blake will be back, so we'll probably get halfway through the next
down.
question. It's fun how much we bury him when he's not here.
Totally.
But thank you to everyone who has submitted a question. If you have a question about anything that we've said here, submit it right away, and we will answer it as part of our AER next week. Or if you have a question on a totally different topic, submit it. You can email questions@invertedorthodoxy.com. You can go to invertedorthodoxy.com, click one of the links that's on any page there, and you can submit a question there completely anonymously. We promise you it is anonymous. We have no idea who it is, and we will do our best to answer that question. Thank you. You can follow us on social media at invertedorthodoxy.com. We hope you have an awesome week and keep asking good questions.